Yes, my name's Robin Parmar, and I'm speaking to you from Limerick, Ireland, where the weather is um, not the same as your weather, I presume. Very rainy and windy here. I work in the Digital Media Arts Research Centre at the University of Limerick, where I'm course director for our undergraduate program. This photo is my neighborhood, or very close to my neighborhood, a stone's throw. It's a part of the Abbey River, which is a tributary of the Shannon. And so throughout this presentation, I'll be showing some photos which you can judge for yourself whether they're relevant. I think only one or two slides put text up on the screen, so I can focus just on the oral experience of reading my text here. So last year, my book, Listening to Places, Exercise Towards Environmental Composition, was published by Void, a gallery in Derry, Londonderry, Northern Ireland. And this monograph presents 36 that is, activities that form the basis for a self-reflexive listening practice. It fills a gap in the market for a practical guidebook targeted to a non-technical audience. The primary goal is to help readers develop appreciations of sounds and their relationships to places. Of course, these are matters that we here gathered at the World Forum of Acoustic Ecology know quite well. But the idea was to encourage others to sort of come into our practice a little bit. And these activities are predicated on platial thinking, a philosophy that asserts the importance of places as responsive contexts that shape and are shaped by our being in the world, to use a phrase from Heidegger. So I'll start slightly poetically. A path begins when one person pushes through overgrown grasses. Then comes another individual through the same field. They naturally tend to take the path most trodden, since there are fewer thorns to step on, fewer bushes to push aside. Eventually, the path is worn bare, a common route through the land, a desire line as it's poetically known. Later, stones will be laid to provide traction for wheels, and if the track is popular enough, it becomes a road. Soon there will be tarmac and pavement, hedges and walls, lampposts and buildings. Travel to another country is invigorating because it foregrounds this process. We discover people similar to ourselves, but who live in a distinct culture evolved in response to their particular places. Perhaps in this society that we visit, a veranda fronts each home so that visitors can be greeted on the verge. Something quite common in regions of the USA, for example, but not here in Ireland. Or perhaps the locals hang laundry on second floor lines strung between houses, the sheets creating a sheltered, convivial place for conversation. Or perhaps each evening the residents bring tables to the center of the road to play cards and drink red wine in the warm summer evenings, which I witnessed in rural Portugal. Every place is a social construct, an accumulation of the experiences and choices of others. As we walk through a place, we walk through its particular history. We make a place as that place shapes us in a mutual, entangled process. For centuries, European culture has been dominated by a mode of spatial thinking that considers the visual sense as superior to others. And here I rehearse an argument I'm sure is very familiar to you. Because this hierarchy is deeply embedded in our language. I see what you mean is a phrase linking vision to understanding. And there are many others in English and other European languages. In the 17th century, this thinking was codified by René Descartes and his followers, who defined the world as built on a quantified, universal, rational space. Places, if considered at all, were relegated to secondary aggregations of qualities. Yet this is not how we experience the world as individuals within its embrace. As Tim Ingold insists, our perception cannot be sliced up along the lines of the sensory pathways, but rather it must be considered as a whole. Indeed, there exists an alternative to the mainstream ocular-centric philosophy that recognizes such embodied subjectivities. Edward Casey has traced this history from the ancient thinker Archytas through the phenomenology of Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, finally to Gaston Bachelard and contemporaries. To describe this arc of thought, a new term is useful. Though we have the adjective spatial, meaning of or relating to space, there's no English word meaning of or relating to place. And actually, if there is in your language, I would like to hear about it. But at least in English, our language biases us to certain ways of thinking. And I've previously proposed the neologism platial, I'm probably not the only one, as an alternative, an analogous term to spatial. And if it tends to sound like the word palatial, that's not a problem for me. It's a useful reminder that place is the palace of being in the world, if you wish to consider it as such. Next slide. My practice of field recording and composition applies platial thinking to the auditory world based on the premise that listening cannot be separated from the listener. As you develop skills in attentive listening, you learn more about the particular place you inhabit. This fact is well understood to us who work in acoustic ecology, but is perhaps not widespread outside our domain, where the works of Armory Schafer, Hildegard Westerkamp, and so many others are unknown. Though in recent years awareness has been growing, the sonic domain has received increased attention through books of analytic philosophy and phenomenology, published interviews with a huge range of artists, and musings on silence and noise, etc., some of which even get into the bestseller lists. But a practical guide to listening itself remains lacking, or at least so I thought when I began. How does one practice this esoteric art? How to develop an appreciation of sonic qualities? For some time, I've been compiling listening exercises for my own purposes. Techniques derived from my formal training as an audio engineer back in the 1980s in Canada, and then my life as a community radio producer, which extended through to the late 1990s. Following this, studies of electroacoustic music in Ireland and the UK. I've learned from peers at workshops across Canada, on sound walks throughout Europe, and so on. So in a very real sense, for me, this small booklet distills a lifetime of learning so far. A draft manuscript was complete before I discovered, to my surprise, that Schafer had already published a comprehensive series of lessons in 1992 in the book A Sound Education. Indeed, once I got my hands on a copy, I saw that 9 of his exercises were identical to those I was proposing. And this coincidence can be readily explained. First, different active listeners are going to approach the nature of sound in similar ways, from shared understandings of acoustics and perception. Second, some of my own tutors might well have derived their lessons directly from a sound education without making this connection clear to me at the time. So I initially believed that this historical precedent rendered my own project redundant. But when Armory Schafer passed in 2021, I decided that the best way to honor his trailblazing work was to follow in his path, another type of desire line. Casual inquiries revealed that though his landmark book, The Soundscape, was famous and well known, far fewer, if any, had actually encountered the book A Sound Education. So that reinforced my decision to bring attention to his contributions through my own. The catalyst came when a Dublin artist, David Beattie, asked me to work on his Slow Time project, organized through Void Gallery in Derry. In August 2021, I led a public sound walk around the Derry city walls. It's a beautiful city, very intriguing city, you should visit. The gallery had an ongoing interest in field recording and so proposed that I write a pamphlet to accompany this project. This would be kept at the gallery alongside their other resources, which included digital audio recorders and headphones that patrons could borrow. So this seemed a good idea to propose my more substantial manuscript, an idea taken up by all parties with enthusiasm. My goal with Listening to Places was to reach people who had little understanding of the precepts and historical background that we know well. The contents were tuned to be free of jargon, developing any required language as part of the workflow. Each exercise was simple in itself, but formed an arc of practice. Schafer's own books were largely targeted to his music students, at least at first, but the scope here is perhaps wider, facilitating sound walks, listening workshops, and composition, while avoiding topics that are strictly musical. So the first 30 exercises require only a notebook and pencil plus dedicated time for attentive listening. The remaining 6 exercises assume some way of recording and playing back sounds. And actually, I'll interject here, a review was just published in the Journal of Sound Studies where this was rightly critiqued, that the exercises based on recording are somewhat underbaked, which I am happy to admit. So each page of the book typically includes open-ended questions to focus listening on a particular topic. So for example, this is a blown up page from the book. Exercise 6, motion, says, focus on a particular sound that is in motion. What can you determine about movement from the sound? Is it the sound that is in motion, or is the sound source in motion? What's the difference? So these passages are followed by a response that you can see is highlighted in color that's designed to be read only after attempting the exercise itself. I mean, this sort of thing can be facilitated in a workshop environment quite easily. On the page, though, you tend to just read ahead into the next block of text. So you can see in this case, the response develops the idea by introducing terminology, in this case, from analytic philosophy, largely from analytic philosophy anyway. And other topics concern themselves more with acoustics, even politics, when we get to topics like noise. So the fundamental topics covered are amplitude, frequency, localization, repetition. There are 5 entries on silence, which I think is an amazing topic. There's 2 entries on noise and 3 on the extended sensorium. The sound museum is used to describe disappearing sounds, while the sound cradle addresses brand new sounds previously unheard in the world. Largely because the book had no cover price, the first edition of 250 copies sold out almost immediately. Of course, that was very gratifying, but this was just a step in the process. The present goal is to gather feedback from readers and from people working on similar projects, some of whom I've heard about here at the conference already. The idea is to develop an expanded edition that would be a more substantial book that would probably be published, well, it would be published and distributed through sort of the normal channels, so you don't have to go to an art gallery website in order to get a hold of it. So in conclusion, let's go to this one. In conclusion, this book would not exist without a core ethos of ecological thinking. This was explicitly acknowledged in the introduction to the book, and it's fitting for me to repeat those lines here as a way to conclude this talk without foreclosing on future possibilities. Quite the opposite, actually. So I wrote, this book is for doers and dreamers, the practical and the philosophical. It's for those who understand that the conventional ways of approaching our environment, both the built and natural environments, have failed. It's for readers who recognize that our current path through the thickets is not leading us to utopia. This guidebook is for everyone who cares about the one all-encompassing place that we share and hold in trust, this planet we call home. So I would very much like to thank Maeve Butler and Void Gallery for their encouragement in this project, for David Beattie for reaching out to me in partnership, and for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in the UK for funding for the actual printing and publication. And thanks to the committee here for including me in these proceedings, and to all of you for your kind attention over these sometimes distressed media channels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin.